It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, who is John Atkinson, who will be presenting Swimming Canada's revival through an investment approach underpinned by analytics. So with that, take it away, John.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for turning up. We've got a few extra seats if there's anybody else out there who would want to come in, so round a few people up. What I'm going to go through over the next 20 minutes or so is a fairly high-level overview of what I've been trying to do in Swimming Canada in the role as High Performance Director. High Performance Director is basically the head of the technical program of Swimming Canada. I manage coaches, scientists, support staff, and we're all really pushing in the same direction to have an improvement in what Swimming Canada do at the end of the day, which is win medals at the Olympic Games. That's really the main purpose. We don't have perhaps the same numbers of athletes. We probably don't have the same budgets of a lot of our competitors in world swimming. So what we have to do is be far more targeted in our approach as to who we identify for investment and opportunity to develop. A little bit about myself. I spent time in Australia coaching in the late 90s, saw home games in Sydney, then moved back to British sport. I worked with British swimming from 2001 through to the conclusion of the London Olympic Games in 2012, and then moved to Canada in early 2013. So I'm thrilled to be here. Hopefully you will have a few insights as to what Swimming Canada have done over the last 5 years and what we have to do as we go forward. So the first part is that we implemented a very systematic process for identifying athletes and events to target at the Olympic Games. As I mentioned before, we may not have the same budget or the same number of athletes that other leading nations in the world have. However, if we're systematic and targeted in our approach, we can increase probability of identifying the right athletes and the right events that we can be successful in. What we have to then do is look at age profiling. There's soon to be 40 events in swimming at the Olympic Games. Are all events the same? And by that, what are the age profiles of each event, which will then impact on the investment that we could look at? And I said it's about increasing probability. What we deal with is looking at the core of what athletes do. There will always be some outliers who come at it from a very different angle to the core, but we can't make systematic programs for outliers. We have to look at the core of what we're doing and try to come up with a system that we get a better bang for our buck in our investment. I will look at a couple of case studies, one of them based around the women's 4x200 freestyle team as well. First thing that I did was define what high performance is for Swimming Canada. If I had maybe 40 coaches in a room, I'd maybe have 80 different opinions of what high performance was. So our high performance was the first thing that we had to determine. So for Swimming Canada, every time I do a presentation to coaches, athletes, parents, support staff, I always put this slide in, because people have to understand where it is that we're going. High performance for Swimming Canada is top 8 in the world, all the Olympic Games, and progressing to the podium. It's as simple as that. If it isn't in the top 8 in the world and progressing to the Olympic podium, it's not high performance. But you can be on track to high performance. Being on track to high performance may be, are you attaining the times that we have worked on that will say that you are on a pathway that you can perform at the Olympic level, maybe in 5, 6 years' time, maybe 3 years' time? Have you won medals at the World Junior Championships? And one of the key things is, are you improving? So this slide refers back to a very simplistic look at the Olympic Games and World Championships, what are the average ages that you're dealing with? So if you look at the top event, the top line is the 50 freestyle, the shortest event in swimming. You're talking men maybe going 21 seconds for 50 meters freestyle. For women, you're talking maybe 23 seconds. So it's the shortest event. The average age for those events, as you can see, is older, maybe 26 years old. So therefore, if you're 8 years or 6 years from the podium, you're 18 to 20 years old. So those type of athletes are probably in college programs. Where if you look down and maybe the fourth or fifth bar, the average age of the women's 800 freestyle is 21 years old, 5 years difference. So if we're talking now for Paris, which is 6 years away, we need to be looking at 14-year-old women who, give or take a couple of years either side of that, are likely to be the ones that are performing in the final at the Paris Olympic Games in 2024. So this is part of understanding what we're trying to find athletes for. What event profile do they fit? Is it power? Is it endurance-based? And how does that fit? What we then look at is what the year-to-year improvement could reasonably be expected from certain age of athletes. So we started by looking at Swimming Canada rankings to see what the improvement rates would be. But then we started to work with Canadian Tire, a company who were part of sponsors of Own the Podium, our funding agencies, about using their analytics department from the banking division to become involved with identifying athletes within sport and coming up with systems. So here is just a difference of two events. Female 400 IM, we start looking at around the 13 years old age group, whereas a male swimming in the 50 freestyle, we don't really start looking until they're 18 years old. And again, this all goes back to knowing the event profile for the core. There may be outliers, but we're about finding systems where we know what the core of the event is going to be. Don't expect you to read that, obviously, but it's there as an illustration that we then have a three-tiered approach, 3 tracks within each event, which may allow for later developers in each event. So we have a male sheet, a female sheet, and the first identifier is, are they getting into these times? Once they've got into the times, we have to look a little bit more. We look at their what we call gold medal profile. Their application, their mental skills, their physiology, their biomechanics, their lifestyle, which is all part of whether we would then invest in an athlete who has shown that they have made these times that we call our on-track times. So we're currently looking at athletes in this phase where we're coming up almost 2 years away, athletes that are within 0.5% of the predicted 8th place time in Tokyo. But whilst we're doing this, we're also looking at our younger athletes for Paris for 2024. And as we collect more information through the quad, the number of athletes that we're looking at each year will get smaller. So right now we have a larger group, maybe 40, 50 athletes and swims who can be top 8. This will get smaller towards one of our stated aims of having 20 finalists. If we have 20 finalists and we're converting about a third of those, we're looking at 6 to 8 medals, which will get us to our stated objective of being a top 6 medal-winning nation at the Olympic Games in swimming. We did that in Rio, where we improved from 2 medals in London to 6 medals at the Rio Olympic Games. So here's one little case study. If we have an 18-year-old and a 24-year-old male, both swimming the 100 meters backstroke, both going a time of 55.4 seconds, they'd both be ranked in the top 150 in the world. Under our old funding criteria, which was based on world rankings, they probably would have both got funding and some support from the Canadian government through Sport Canada. The question is, are they both a good investment? One of them, 24, already slightly older than the average age of the final of that event, and one of them 18 years old. If we use the analytics and the data that we have got from Canadian Tire within our system, if we look at the red dotted line, is the predicted improvement for the 18-year-old based on the norms of improvement from known performers at the Olympic Games and World Championships. If we look at the 24-year-old, based on the improvement or the regression that tends to happen as athletes get older, he's trending in completely the opposite direction. And again, this is a high-level overview of the types of decisions for investment that we look at. And when we talk with coaches, any coach is going to tell you their athlete is going to improve. But I ask them based on what? Based on what is your 24-year-old athlete doing or going to do differently to show that they can improve. They're both ranked in the top 150, but I'm now saying we will invest in the 18-year-old that's improving, and improvement is key. Annual improvement compared to continuing to be ranked 90th in the world every year is a better investment for me. If they were both swimming at 52.4 seconds, it would make sense to invest in both because they're both performing within the definition that I outlined at the beginning of what high performance is. So the evidence that we have, the improvement rates, we have to look at what resources we have and who is a better investment, and it's the 18-year-old as opposed to the 24-year-old. Unlike professional sports and professional teams, we can't go out and buy an athlete to swim the 100-meter backstroke for Canada. Well, you've got to be born in Canada, you've got to have Canadian passport, you've got to be able to show improvement, and then we'll invest in you. We have what we have, and therefore that's why we've gone very targeted. Here's another example of things that we did. And this was to support a funding request for the women's 4x200 freestyle team. Canada has, until 2016, never won a medal in this event at the Olympic Games. And therefore, we went to the 2015 World Championships in Kazan in Russia and looked at our relay teams. And where did our relay teams finish 1 year out from the Olympic Games? In this slide, you can see if we look at the women's 4x200 freestyle team, world ranked 11th in 2015. The world champs was 11th. The percentage gap to first place was 2.4 seconds, and the percentage gap to third, getting a bronze medal, was 1.6. So how am I going to convince our funding agencies that the women's 4x200 freestyle relay is a smart investment to win a medal 1 year later when we finished 11th in the world? And therefore, what you have to look at are the points in which you can prove your case for why this event is worthy of investment. And perhaps one of the other teams that was a better performer in 2015, realistically, isn't a chance at the podium in 2016. So where were we? At the World Champs, the process of qualification for the Olympic Games for relays is that if you finish in the top 12 at the World Championships the year before the Olympic Games, your relay qualifies. Places 13 to 16 are done on rankings, which allows for if a country gets a disqualification, doesn't finish within the top 12, but they're a top 8 nation, they can still make it to the Games. So here's our team. 4 ladies that swam, placed 11th. It qualified. but it was nowhere near where we could reasonably expect that team should be. But if we then went to the World Junior Championships, which happened in the same year in Singapore, and we look at the team where our female athletes are all aged 17 and younger, and we look at some of the faster splits in that team, say Taylor Ruck, 156.7, quicker than any swimmer that we had at the World Championships in Kazan, the senior worlds. It swam faster than our senior team. The athletes were younger and had a phenomenal improvement curve happening for where they were at with their stage of development. So if we look at the world rankings that are at the top there, to get on the podium took a time of 7:49 at the World Champs in 2015 at the Senior Championships. We were 7:57 with our senior team and our junior team. We then looked at what athletes do we have in September 2015, where are they at in their improvement, what is their date of birth, are they improving or are they not? And then we look at the work that we did with Canadian Tire's analytics team about the average expected rate of improvement for world-class athletes. And if we combined the World Senior Championships in Kazan, the World Junior Championships in Singapore in 2015, and looked at what we could have had with our best 4 performers, that came up with a time of 7:48. So in my mind, with our best athletes from our senior and junior programs combined, we have a team of women that can stand on the podium in Rio. So therefore, my case for investment is starting to look a little bit stronger, that this is a worthy team that we should be investing in based on where the athletes are at and how they're improving. So if we then applied the predictive improvement rates towards that team, we could conceivably come up with a team that would get us to 7:45.8 by the Rio Olympic Games. Now, considering that we were only performing at 7:57 the year before, if I go into the funding agencies and say, I have a gut feeling that the team's going to go well, they'll say, well, we don't work on gut feeling. We work on looking at the data, looking at where your athletes are at. So we then have other athletes that are improving. So the next best 4 on predicted progression. So we have a pool of 8 athletes. We probably would take more than 8 to the Olympic Games. Sorry, more than 4 to the Olympic Games so that we have cover. How did this all play out? So the team in the heats in Rio ranked 6th, qualified for the final with a time of 7:51. And the way that this then works is, how are we going to get these athletes to perform and have our best team available for the final? So every athlete that's selected on the relay team or part of the relay squad goes to the games knowing that their place is not guaranteed, but everybody is as important as each other who makes the team. The team won a bronze medal. Swimmer Penny Alexiak, who tied for the 100 freestyle gold medal in Rio at 16 years old, swam the 4th fastest split in the entire race in the final. But we wouldn't have been able to perhaps get the investment or the funding needed for this team of women without the use of the data and the progressions that we had in place to justify why we were investing in a team that was 11th at the World Championships in the previous year. And we're applying this process across all our investment areas within Swimming Canada. So the relay team, the 4x2, broke the Canadian record by almost 4 seconds, was almost 12 seconds faster than they were the year before. 3 of the team made them the fastest ever 3 women for Canada in that event. But we had 2 swimmers who swam the heats, who didn't swim in the final, but they become Olympic medalists as well. So from that one relay team, 6 women from Canada had an Olympic medal. The impact that that has on our entire team can never be underestimated. In London in 2012, we had 2 men leave the Olympic Games with medals from the pool. So from this relay, we already have 6 medalists. And what that then does is we need to then expand that group out, because what's the next step from this? So we go back and we rebuild. So this year in August, the World Junior Championships were in Indianapolis. We took some of our senior performers now. We say senior, they're 17 and 18 years old compared to 16. We put them together at the World Junior Championships in Indianapolis with the intent to win as many medals in relays at the World Junior Championships with what our predicted team is likely to be for Tokyo in 2020. We came away with 6 medals in relays, 5 golds, more relay medals at the World Junior Championships than any nation in the world. And now we have a group of performing young women who, if they continue to improve, will be the ones that stand, we hope, on the podium in Tokyo at the 2020 Olympic Games. And some of them will be of age that will continue swimming through to Paris. But the key for us is to make sure that we keep working with other athletes that we identify, so that we don't just sit with those 4 or 6. We might want 10 by the time we get to 2021 to keep that pressure coming through. Got a little bit of time for questions, but hopefully that gave you a high-level overview of what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and what we hopefully will achieve at the next Olympic Games in Tokyo and beyond. So thanks very much.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is very insightful information, but as I saw through, it's all based on your athletes locally, as in just Canada. At what point do you start merging that data with competitors, like a US for relay team? Because
Sure.
you could be seeing their timings as well in the World Championships and the previous Olympics, and you can start taking that data.
So initially, when we started to look at this approach for identifying athletes, we were using information that was available to us in Swimming Canada. And we did use that for progression rates and improvement from year to year. As we got involved with the Canadian Tire Analytics group, they were able to do things that they explained as a data scrape, and other people may know that term better than me. It was kind of all foreign to me, where they took over 2 million data points, put them into the system from world ranking websites. It also then looked at specifically performing athletes at the Olympic Games and World Championships and extrapolating back from their best performance to their progression curves from real athletes at the international level. So therefore, that is now built into the system, that if we identify an athlete at 15 years old in Canada in whatever event, do they fit these funnels that we've created based on the athletes that have actually performed?
So following up on the previous point, once you've identified that some of your athletes were on a particular curve, would it be sufficient for, let's say, your potential funders to say, I predict this progression because they're on this particular curve, or would you need more information to justify that decision to your funders?
Again, as we know, as nice as we can model anything, nothing ever goes in a straight line. There may be mitigating circumstances why a particular athlete has a year where they're injured, for example, or ill. What we then come back on is what we refer to as the gold medal profile. So the time is the first indicator that we will look at this athlete towards investment, but then we may run a gold medal profile that actually shows that they're deficient in so many areas, and some of those areas are key to what we would want to see. So the funders will come back at us and they will say, what's the gold medal profile of these athletes that you've identified, and how are you going to show that you can continue to work with each athlete to improvement so that they stay on or close to the curve. I think I have a couple here. Yep.
How does the decision to invest or sponsor an athlete, how does that impact their progression curve?
Okay.
You looked at the value, basically.
Yeah. So it's like anything in year one when we brought this into a sport that was very preoccupied with world rankings. It was a hard sell to say that we are actually going to invest in an athlete that's ranked 350th in the world compared to an athlete that's ranked 85th. So I know we're approaching 4 years since that change in investment that started in 2014, and we are beginning to show evidence-based information that suggests that the athletes who we initially invested in here have continued to improve incrementally year on year. That could be due to their age. However, we do recognize that the younger that you go, the more variables there are. But I'd rather have a 50-50 chance with those variables with a 16, 17, 18-year-old than invest in a 24-year-old older than the average age of the event where I know there's no chance that they're going to invest. I guess in 4 more years I'll be able to give you more information as to whether we have more identified athletes making it through or not.